And I said, thank you very much. It was worth every cent. So thanks for having me here for Lent, the first week of Lent, and I get to be a part of this. I do have a Mennonite background, and so things of the, how do I put this, the liturgical year, I didn't grow up with that, right? It was something that I fell in love with as I grew older and the more I studied and whatnot, and I found that there was just kind of a beauty in it of how you have this unifying, whoa, we good? Just keep talking? All right, unifying feature worldwide, right? That today you have churches everywhere that are reading the same scriptures, many of the same prayers. That unifying spirit is within this. And so I'm blessed to be here with you today. And as Alexandra mentioned, I work with what's called transitional leadership. What I do is I go into churches and help them kind of figure out what's happening either between pastors or if they're in a state of unknown, so to speak. Maybe it's a hard time, whatever it might be. And it can be everything from spending a weekend with a church and walking them through some key issues to a 6 to 18-month period of just sitting in with them and walking them through. And so it's been a blessing. Sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking. Sometimes it's a little, I'm an agitated person to begin with, so it just helps with keeping that agitation flowing, right? So I'll try not to be too agitated up here. How does that sound? Is it good? Is it pretty echoey? It's good? Okay, it's just my head. All right. I also have 4 kids and a son-in-law. That's how I introduce them every time. So I have 4 children and a son-in-law. And I have 2 grandchildren. So, been blessed. I get to go for coffee quite often. That's part of my work. It's part of my habits. It's part of just being me. I grew up with that. My dad was a coffee guy, as I like to say. And when I say a coffee guy, a lot of people think of that idea of coffee snob might come to mind, right? No, my dad was a coffee guy. Like, he just went for coffee. And we would come along. My sister and I, my youngest sister and I, we'll joke around about the idea of getting tricked into going along with dad for coffee. Because as a kid, you don't have a great sense of what time looks like, right? And dad would go like, well, you want to come along to Steinbach? I grew up in New Bothwell, by the way, just to give you a little bit of a reference point. And we'd go, well, yeah, we want to go to Steinbach, get off the farm, go, hang out at the mall. No. Every time we would get tricked with it. We'd go to the smallest mall so dad could hang out with his friends for 3 or 4 hours. And I have vivid memories of lying down on the, you'd have the booth or whatever restaurant you're in, and you're lying there and just, developing a new prayer life of just like, God, just take one of us home. And whichever home it is right now, just take us home, we're done. But then the next week, the Saturday, yeah, you guys want to come along? I'm going for coffee. Yeah, okay, I'll go along for coffee. And you do it all over again, right? Well, now I do that. I don't drag any of my kids along, but I'm a coffee person. And more important, and I think beyond that, I'm a community person. I enjoy living into my neighborhood. I live in Transcona right now, and so I will often reference to friends or when I invite somebody for coffee, I'll talk to them about my Starbucks. And it's now you have a few friends, all of a sudden they get it, right? They're like, okay, they don't even need to know the address. Don't need to send them a pin. They go to Eric's Starbucks. And so I've developed a friendship with the people that are there. And I have that at that location. I have a few places. You may have noticed it already that I like to talk to people. So I also have my superstore. I have, my staples, things like that. All of a sudden I have a lot of my places. And somehow I get known. It just happens, I guess. Well, this one particular Starbucks, they've come to know what I do. And they have some fairly deep conversations. It's interesting when you go for coffee at a place often enough, you have people on their breaks suddenly lingering at your table and things like that. And I love it. That speaks to my soul. I feel like I'm doing kingdom building as part of that. And in that place, I can remember just recently, actually, while I was working on Psalm 32. Psalm 32 is it was great. It was speaking into the moment. It felt like it was handpicked for the moment that I was in, as well as coming here to speak to you. And as I was sitting, I actually had my Bible open at my table, and I'm looking at forgiveness, reading about it, going through the words, meditating on it, writing different notes down. I get up to get a second coffee, and suddenly there's a flurry of activity, because apparently in the back room, all these, the people that were on that shift were having these deep, traumatic conversations about certain files that came out. And it was hitting all of them because they were all in the same age bracket. They were all like, there was a depth of despair about humanity. And I thought, what an amazing moment. And I somehow got trapped into that conversation. I don't think I got trapped. I think I jumped into it more likely. And the first question that came up was, Eric, do you believe in the death penalty? And I looked around the room, sitting in a Starbucks, basically the only person there other than the staff. And that was the question. And I said, well, that's complicated. Let's talk. Why are you talking about that while you're working at Starbucks in this, service field? And one person after another had a different take. They had a little bit of a debate going on in the back. They had all these conversations, and none of them have a church background. None of them have a sense of grace. They have no sense of the cross. They have no sense of who is Jesus, except for those types of conversations. And so in that moment, I felt like I was able to at least, let's stir this up a little bit more. Let's find nuance. Let's find what is it that bothers you about this? Well, where is the goodness? Are you finding goodness in your world? And one of the questions that came up, it was a person that was actually it was almost like I was on TV. That's how it felt. I like TV scenes. I don't know, do you like that when you feel like you're on a TV show all of a sudden? Yeah, a few of you, okay, that's okay. The rest of you, it's okay. It was in your heart. You felt like you liked to be, okay. But all of a sudden, I look back at my Bible at the table. I look over here, and just sweeping across, literally, one of the employees was literally sweeping behind the counter. And she just stops and looks at me. Do you believe that everyone is redeemable? I said, no, that's the question. That's a big one. And I looked back at the Bible again, and I said, you guys, you know what I'm studying right now? I'm talking about divine forgiveness. I'm talking about this whole idea of that God's goodness and what it feels like beyond just what it is. And of course, some of them conversation continued, but it fizzled pretty quick after that because they had to actually work, right? And I had to get back to what I was going to do today. But it was interesting to me that these were the questions on their minds, that they were sitting there in this moment, and it took a very dark item to help them get to that spot, to say, what's our state as humanity? Who are we? Who are we in all this? So forgiveness has always been a big part of my language, of the way that I operate, and I love the topic because I feel that forgiveness is one of those things that we desire. We're not sure how to approach it, but we need it. And I think that, of course, the model that God has given us in forgiveness, and when we look at this passage and we think about how it's broken down, this feels like if you have a moment and you get to look at Psalm 32, the flow of Psalm 32 feels like the human condition. It feels like, as a person, this is how I would approach, maybe wrongly, but also rightly, or maybe made right within that forgiveness and the need for it. So when I think about even the title I gave for today, I was talking about messing up. And I think the focus is more so, not so much on the messing up, but on the forgiveness that can be given. The forgiveness that we desire. If I think through all my relationships, you don't do this right before you go to bed. Okay, that's my advice. Don't lay down in bed and just think through all of your relationships and the state of like, when have I done wrong? That may not be the best time to do it. But there's something about just going through our relationships as individuals. I mentioned all the my places, right? Every little setting, all the times that we have it where maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe there's something that we imposed our thinking onto someone else. Maybe we wanted something more, or we didn't feel justified, or we felt like we were wronged, but we didn't express how we were wronged. And we leave that. Is there another mic on, maybe? No? Okay. We leave that stuff, that messiness, with everyone around us. And we kind of carry one another's baggage, if you will. And the interesting thing about the picture that's given here in the psalm is that that's not the ideal. That we want a space where we're creating comfort, that we're both humble, but we're also showing others how to find that humility, where we can have the heart that says when wrong has happened, that corrects, that grows within correction, that also says, this is how it feels. I've always struggled a little bit with, shouldn't say always. Always is a big word, right? So maybe not always, but for quite a while. I believe NRSV, that's pretty much the Bible translation here, right? So that's what I use for study. And I can remember when I first encountered a translation, I was younger, not super young, but I can remember encountering this where all of a sudden, every time the word blessed or blessed was used in other translations that I was used to, happy was being used instead. And I can remember debates in Sunday school. I can remember all of this, a little bit of the Mennonite guilt coming into it and everything, sitting in it and going, I don't know about happy. Happy is based on my circumstances, whereas blessed, well, blessed. And then it would just trail off. There'd be like ... on the screen, that kind of idea. Well, being blessed. And everybody would go, oh yeah, blessed. Okay? And then the question would be, well, what is blessed? And everybody would go, well, it's, you look at it in Hebrew and the Greek, and it's blessed. It's blessed, that's what it is. And you go, but what is blessed? What does it mean? And no one really had an answer. So for some reason, there was this sense of, well, happy is too superficial, but blessed was just a word that didn't go anywhere. We were supposed to use it, but we didn't know how. And so I grew into using words like happy. Because the funny thing is that I realized that when people feel blessed, when they feel a sense that they've been forgiven, then they feel that sense of knowing the relationship is right, there's happiness. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a facade level happiness. It's a deeper level to it. Because there's something about all of a sudden realizing what right relationship looks like. That's the depth that I was missing in those two words being compared. That somehow, as the psalmist says in those first two verses, he's happy because of this. He may not have had everything right in his life. He may not have had enough money to pay all the bills. He may not have had all those things. But his teaching here is he was happy because of the right relationship. And he had comparisons for it. You look at the terms used of the parallels that he makes, right? Talks about transgression, talks about sin, talks about iniquity. And when you look at that, you go, okay, that's three different terms. And in the past, I would have glanced over that because I would have just said, oh yeah, all the wrongdoings are done. That's past, it's covered, whatever, right? But there's depth to that. There's the whole idea of that the transgression, the broken relationship. It actually alludes to that idea of that you've done something to break relationship. Sin, the reference to breaking the law, that missing the mark. Iniquity, I had one commentator talk about the idea of crooked character. And I wrote down a bad actor, someone who's just out to do something wrong, to make it that others may get hurt in the process. All three of those things. And the psalmist talks about being happy because those have been covered, those have been changed for the right. There's justice happening within this. And he's happy about it. I thought, well, yeah, that's a great reason to be happy. And in my notes, I like to, if you saw my Bible, you'd see I've got all kinds of multicolored pens. I realized where my purple pen went, and it's gone now. Isn't that great? I picked the color and everything. It's great. Well, it's gone now, so okay, it's at home somewhere. But anyways, so you have purple, green, red in my Bible, and just writing down questions, writing down, I don't know if you do this, but just in the margin, just saying, this word sums up what's happening right here. And through this psalm, it felt like I said earlier about the whole idea of the human condition. He builds up, he says where it went wrong, and brought back to the same spot. It ends off where it started. It starts happy, ends happy. But in the middle, he has to go through the work. And so when I talk about that happiness that he starts with, it's interesting. The next spot, he goes to like a hiding place. And he talks about it actually making him physically ill. That the internal work, what he knew was wrong, things that were not right, were trying to work their way out physically. To talk about the whole idea of distress, that whole idea of just wrestling with it. I don't know if you've ever felt that. Maybe I may be the only person in the room who's felt that. But getting that where you feel like you're eating about 14 Tums a day because you've got a little indigestion because you said something dumb at the store. Yeah. I get that occasionally. About 3 times a week only. It's not too bad. When you talk a lot, you have a lot of room for error. That's all I'm going to say. But that whole sense of hiding, that idea of just, well, maybe it'll just go away. Maybe if I don't say anything, it'll just go away. And he expresses it. This physical angst, something to work through. And it feels like the pinnacle in this psalm is that verse 5, where it's a humbling. Where all of a sudden to say, okay, this is what needed to happen, the confession. To say, okay, I am needing to be in a place where I know I'm vulnerable, but you've allowed space. And maybe you haven't, but I need to say it. But it's your inner work that's happening within that moment, that humbling moment. And the honesty. Those next couple of verses, when I think about a bridle or a bit for a horse, it's the idea of having to be forced into the right direction. I have on my wall at home, I collect knickknacks like you wouldn't believe. I've got, my dad passed away a couple of years ago, and we, as siblings, we had to sell the farm and whatnot. And I realized where I got my gift of curation from, because there are so many things just stockpiled everywhere in that house, that yard. We found stuff in granaries, like granaries that had stuff that we knew from 50, 60 years ago. And we're like, why was this kept in a granary? But maybe he was going to start a museum. I'm not sure. But within all of that, I found a few key items that I looked at and said, oh, wow, those were like watermarks or pinnacle moments in my own upbringing. And they're like important, right? And, some people have come over, and my siblings in particular will look at it and go, why do you have that on the wall? Wasn't that in the porch somewhere hidden behind a freezer? And I go, yeah, I know. I don't know why I remembered it, but it stood out, And so one of those items is a bit, because I remember vividly my one sister being majorly into horses, and to the point where she actually bought a young horse once to break it, which is a huge feat for somebody who had never done it before. This 17-year-old young woman saying, we're going to do this. And she was the right person for it. That said something about her temperament and personality and character. Hi, Irene, if you're watching. But she's the one who noticed it on the wall the first. She says, oh, you have one of those? And I said, yeah, for some reason it stood out. And as I was reading this, studying it, it kept coming to mind. And it comes up a couple of times in Scripture about the idea of this steering device to tell the animal, you're moving this way now. This is what's happening. And I realize that's part of the if you don't, something else may pull you in the right direction. There may be other things in life that will have to steer you. It may be God himself. And to look at that and say, wow, yeah, that's an honest moment. To go through that conviction, to confess, and then all of a sudden to realize, okay, I've learned something from what I've done. I've learned something from what has happened. What will help that I don't need to be put into a position again where I might have to be steered? And the beauty of it is, we're messy people. We get to do that over and over again. Isn't that great? Awesome, yeah. We all know how good that feels, right? And that's why it's amazing that, once again, the psalmist ends off with being happy. Even though describing this whole process, it's like this coming back to it and saying, well, his steadfast love. The idea of being in God's embrace. The idea of being in right relationship. The idea of being in a spot where, wow, I am loved. I am taken care of. That was hard, but I'm a part of something special. Someone who wants to protect me, who wants to walk with me. I thought, what a great reminder, right? Going into this first week of Lent. And as we look forward, as we look through the ashes, as we look through the temptations, as we look through the humanness of Jesus, all those different things, the reality of, wow, this is the peace that he brings. This is the peace that he brought. That we get to be messy and we get to go through all these things. But there's the comfort of his steadfast love. The comfort of knowing that he's walking with us in all of that. I have one quick story about being happy that I love. I don't know, it was one of those reminders that comes up when you sometimes when you read a passage numerous times, right? Something just sticks from your own humanness or from your own life. And one of them was with my oldest son. His name is Corbin, and I can remember vividly he had a gift for words. And one of the moments that really struck me was when he started school, when he was in kindergarten. We went for our first, I don't know what it's called nowadays, but the portfolio day or whatever, right? Student-teacher meetings, those kinds of things. And we went and we wanted to hear all about how Corbin was doing. And the classroom was a bit chaotic, let's just say it that way. And you had this kindergarten teacher that was about a year or two off of graduating, in other words, retiring, right? And she'd said, oh, these have been the last couple of years have been the hardest, just for the chaotic nature and whatnot. And she goes, but Corbin does something unique, and it just really hit me because I've never seen it before. She says, anytime something goes wrong where one student hurts another, where there's like a disruption, but we have to make amends or whatever it might be, and they apologize. And she said, I heard it from across the room. The one kid said to Corbin, says, I'm sorry. And Corbin said, I forgive you. And she said it struck her to the core because she said she had never heard a student say that before. She'd heard, it's okay. The things that we teach our kids, right? It's okay. That's all right. No problem. It's fine. Corbin said, I forgive you. Because he had started to hear it at home. And I realized how important that was. That for this teacher in particular to see that she said, that's much deeper. That's much deeper than just, it's okay. Or just pass it off. It's fine. It didn't bother anybody, right? We're not bothered. And the reality is, through this psalm, through life, through other passages, right, as we read this, we realize, no, it does go deeper. There is more to it. I forgive you. And, of course, that really stuck with me. When I think about the happiness that teacher felt, that was blessed. That was that moment to say she felt blessed by this. She understood that, wow, there was something to be said, there was something to be felt in that moment, and it was given. And so I think of this as part of the the shalomic activity, that whole idea of peace and completion and wholeness in what we do in life. That God has this plan of shalom, and we're all part of it. We get to be a part of it. And so when I think about what does that happiness look like, what does it feel like to forgive, to give that forgiveness, to give that light, it's an amazing feeling. And I hope that that's one thing that we can lean into more and more, especially in chaotic times, especially in times where people read up files and they need to talk about it and say, is there more to this? Is it just the human condition, or is there more? Amen?